Welcome, everyone, to the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville. My name is Kevin. I'm going to be your captain here on the Union Federation Starship. And I'd like to welcome my crew because we've got 2 episodes of Star Trek to talk about. Really excited about this. But first, let me welcome my brother from another mother and also the co-founder of the Fandom Podcast Network, Mr. Kyle Wagner. What's going on, buddy?
Well, first and foremost, it's been a bit since you've been in the captain's chair at the Union Federation, and because normally I'm usually in the captain's chair for Strange New Worlds, but we've had double things thanks to Comic-Con. It's been crazy. I just have one important question for you. Are you wearing the prerequisite captain shiny pants that are required when you sit in the captain's chair for Strange New Worlds?
No comment.
I'm just going to say, if you're not wearing them, it's our other crew member you have to answer to.
This is true. Of course, we have to have the Oracle and our science officer with us, as always. Hayley, Stoddart, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing good. I think I'm here. I think I'm in 3D this time, though. At least I hope I am. Is this real?
What have I told you about those portals?
I don't remember. I'm too excited. But I can't say anything either. So sorry, no questions.
All right, guys. First of all, Amy is away. She's in the UK right now, having a lot of fun with some friends, of course, from the BQ network. And I think she's heading back over to the States, and she's going to go to some Star Trek convention thingy. And so she's going to be busy.
Some little tiny Star Trek. Not a big deal at all.
But guys, I'm excited because we are discussing 2 episodes of Strange New Worlds. The first one, of course, we're going to be discussing is Those Old Scientists and also Under the Cloak of War. So we got our we got things cut out for us here. But first, if you guys haven't seen them yet, spoiler alert. Yes, if you have not seen these episodes, go check them out and then come back to this awesome podcast. We appreciate it. Kyle, yes, you got something to bring up to us. What's up?
Well, I just want to ask you, because obviously this is an oddball week thanks to San Diego Comic-Con and Paramount dropping the crossover episode Saturday night onto Paramount Plus and announcing it at San Diego Comic-Con. But I have a question for you, Kevin, because somebody in this crew was at San Diego Comic-Con at the time. And I'm just curious because I know you were busy with some things representing another group there, and was there any buzz going around about this episode of Strange New Worlds dropping at Comic-Con, or what was the next day reactions like?
Okay, so I was only at Comic-Con through Friday, Wednesday preview night through Friday. For those of you that don't know, Comic-Con's always been, they have a Wednesday preview night where fans get to come in. I think it's 6:00 at night to like around, I don't know, 8 or 9, whatever it is. And then it continues from Thursday through Sunday. I was only scheduled through Friday because I had to come back for a family reunion on Saturday. Also, I had to go see Barbieheimer or Oppen Barbie on the same day. So I didn't, and as you mentioned, I was involved in another franchise. I was doing stuff at the Hasbro booth for the G.I. Joe franchise. Our G.I. Joe costume group was there, nerding it up all the time we were there. I didn't catch wind that there was 2 episodes dropping. I didn't hear about it until like after I got home on Saturday, I think it was. And I'm like, wait a minute, 2 episodes drop? I think I sent you a message, Kyle, going, am I understanding this right? So no, I didn't hear any buzz about it at all. Of course, I was kind of in my own little G.I. Joe island.
Yeah, I was just curious because Star Trek was one of the few really outside of Hasbro. So I know Star Trek had a huge presence at Comic-Con, so I wasn't sure.
It did, but it wasn't part of my presence, to be honest with you, because I was kind of my own little area. I didn't get to walk the whole floor, but I did. But yeah, if I had more time over the weekend, I probably would have caught it and done it. So yeah, but good news though. It was kind of a fun little surprise that we got that, which is why we're discussing 2 episodes today. So let's go ahead and get right into things, guys. Let's go ahead and hit the Admiral's log for Strange New Worlds, episode 7, season 2, Those Old Scientists. And Hayley, if you don't mind, could you read the plot synopsis for us?
Of course. In the 24th century, Ensign Brad Boimler of the USS Cerritos is assigned to investigate an ancient portal. The portal, which is powered by the rare substance heronium, sends him back in time 120 years, where he is taken aboard the Enterprise. Boimler struggles to contain his excitement at meeting his heroes and also to prevent polluting the timeline with his knowledge of the future. The portal is taken by Orion's science ship, and Pike trades grain supplies to retrieve it. However, when they attempt to return Boimler to the future with the last remaining heronium, Beckett Mariner appears through the portal attempting a rescue, depleting the portal's power. Spock and Boimler unsuccessfully try to synthesize heronium to make another attempt, while Mariner and Uhura work to translate the portal's engravings. Boimler realizes heronium from the hull of the NX-01 Enterprise was incorporated into Pike's Enterprise, allowing him and Mariner to return to their own time. The Orions agree to accept credit for discovering the portal in exchange for allowing them to pass through peacefully.
Awesome. Okay, guys. Now, we knew this episode was coming. We were very excited for it. We knew the crossover. We just didn't know exactly what to expect from it. So we're going to get more into what it was like seeing the animated universe of Star Trek mix and mingle with the live action universe of Star Trek. But I wanted to kind of get your reaction, not only your first reaction, but did it exceed your expectations? Let's go ahead and start with you there, Hayley. What do you think?
Yeah. So again, we did know about this being a thing. I was super apprehensive and nervous about this. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh no, they're going to animate my characters that I love so much. And I have to say, I was thoroughly enjoying this episode. I was surprised by it and really had a good time. It was way better than I anticipated. And despite them animating the opening credits, I think the only thing that I didn't love was just a couple of things, which I know were a nod to the Lower Decks opening credits. But they did really well, and I am very pleased.
Kyle, what say you?
I was really looking forward to this episode. I always find Lower Decks to be so much fun and entertaining. And I was very curious about how they were going to pull this off, and I think that was the big question and the piece of apprehension a lot of people had. Now, Hayley, I know you're not as big of a Lower Decks fan as I am, but I thought they did a beautiful job with this. It was amazing. It was great how they fit it within the storyline as well and made it make sense. And I got to say this, I have no opposition to further storylines where we get a little live action Boimler and Mariner, because Jack Quaid and Tawny just were great in live action, just as they are great when they're just doing voice work for the animated series.
You know, I was giggling the whole time. I was really impressed of how well they were able to take on a live action version of their characters, because that's a different challenge. When you're used to just voicing the characters and then you do a live action, it's like what they're doing with Mandalorian and Bo-Katan, the character there originally animated, then had to do a live action version, but then make it fun as well. Was so cool to watch this. And I loved how they had a little throw out item of like, you notice how slow everyone talks here? That was really, really funny.
No. To me, one of the best moments is when he's in Pike's office and he sees the saddle. Riker!
Yes. there was a lot of great little call outs, but it exceeded my expectations. It was done really, really well. It was written real cleverly, and it was nice to see the crew of the Strange New Worlds. How there's like a time difference there. So like characters had to be careful not to like give anything away, and how he was trying to circumvent that, and little things like him trying to like, do a future fix on the console while everyone had turned their backs. Just little things like that.
We're letting him do this?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't see anything, so I'm just going with it.
So guys, obviously we had the guest stars here. We had Jack and Tawny here reprise their characters. Now I wanted to ask you, how well do you think they did this live action? Hayley, start with you.
Well, I know this kind of gets into the ready room, so I know we'll kind of talk about it. I really loved their discussion of how they like went and were watching episodes and trying to throw in things of their characters, because again, they're animated, so they're not doing like the running that Boimler does and kind of those maneuvers and acting how they do. And I think they did a really well job of embracing kind of the attitude that these characters are given in this animated show in real life. That was something I was thoroughly surprised by. I tried to have no expectations of how this was going to go and how I was going to feel about it. And so I was thoroughly enjoying how they portrayed these characters. And I like the concept of, Tawny talks about, well, I've always pictured, because her hair's so bouncy, that she's got curls. And they were like, yeah, curls, definitely. And the right tone of purple and the scream. And it's funny, you talk about Boimler, and I was like, okay, he's going to freak out. But surprisingly, I think Mariner did worse of messing up the timeline and like throwing things in than Boimler did. Even though he was doing a lot, he kind of learned to temper himself. And I was waiting for like Mariner to get like chewed out from like Pike or somebody. She was just, and I'm like, this is going to be really interesting. So yeah, it was, but I think they did really well portraying these characters and then talking about getting to put on their uniforms for like actual and keeping their comm badges, which I think just about everybody does.
Kyle, your thoughts on how these voice actors got to portray their real live action counterparts?
Well, I'm going to see a little piece of thing they said in the ready room too, and I think we're going to
feel free and touch on that one, because we're going to I'm going to steal a segment from that. So go for it.
Yeah. When they talk about how much they both look like their characters, and that was never intentional. That was just something that just happened. But how Tawny Newsome and Jack Wade do look like Mariner and Boimler, and I think that works really well. You add into the fact, and I think this is one of the things that I absolutely loved about this episode, is the fact that they were kind of, even though they're part of the Trek family, they were experiencing something different in their Trek for the first time with this episode. And it showed. And you could just feel it in the episode, the energy they brought and how it was infectious to everybody around them. And I would love to see the daily outtakes. I would love them to do a Star Trek special or just and behind the scenes of this episode and just 45 minutes of the outtakes and all that kind of stuff, because they must have been losing it with the way these two were probably acting on set, and they were all just loving it.
Yeah, well said. And that's what I want to do for our away mission here, is I want to get more into depth about the Lower Decks Strange New World crossover, and get more into about the story itself, some of the character interactions. So let's go ahead and hit our first away mission. All right, guys, let's talk about the crossover here. Obviously, we're very enamored with what they've done here and the live action versions of Mariner and Boimler. And I love the fact that even live action Mariner had the rolled up sleeves and they were talked about it and stuff like that. And then there was like the interesting thing with Boimler being very shy of meeting Una, because she's like on a Starfleet poster near his bunk, and so he was kind of starstruck. And you also had the same thing with Mariner and Uhura, and then the weird thing with Spock smiling that Boimler was saying. There's all these weird things that were going
Spock
on while they're trying not to spoil, anything in the future that was going on. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the episode overall and how. I'm going to tease now. In the next topic, we're going to talk about Star Trek crossovers on other shows, and I found a list that has a great like their top 10, and I want to compare this one here in that part with this. So give us what you thought, how this story overall was, anything that stood out for you, some of your favorite moments. Hayley, let's go to you.
I think the best surmise of this episode is a line from Pike. And I feel like I'm trying to stop a toddler from knocking over the future.
Yep, that was a good
And
one.
then also, I was thoroughly unprepared for how hot young Spock would be.
I forgot about that one. That was a good one.
I liked this, because I mean, we can picture ourselves, how would we react if something happened? We stumbled across something, I don't know, a rock, because I've started watching Outlander, and suddenly we ourselves are in Star Trek and it's real, and we know things, but we don't know things. And so you're trying not to ruin the timeline, because that's going to take out TOS and TNG and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and it would screw with Lower Decks timeline and everything that happens after that. Like, it would mess up so much stuff. But then you're also like, fangirling, and the fact that later in the episode, Uhura and Ortegas, when they realize that there's a piece of the NX-01 which was made of heronium that's on the Enterprise, because every ship after gets a piece of the NX-01 into it in some capacity, how they were fangirling over Mayweather and Sato. And I love this like idea, because as fans of this, if this became us, like, we would be acting the same way, and Pike would be saying to us, like, stop, but I think it was integrated really, really well into the story of, here's this past thing, again, something else that's happened that some other show is aware of, and they're going to throw it in and make an episode about it. And then I really am really loving that about this season, of taking just these little things and making them a bigger thing. And I think it's wonderful.
It's interesting. There was parts of this episode that was reminding me of that TNG episode with Berlinghoff Rasmussen, who was from the past. And he said he was from the future. He was like stealing stuff. I think it was a Matter of Time or something like that. I can't remember the episode, but I was having some like stuff where he was like trying not to spoil like what was going to happen when he was kind of, BSing some of the time here. Kyle, your thoughts on this episode, and how was there any moments that stood out for you? Same question that I had with Hayley.
There's so many moments in this. You're showing on the picture you're showing for those of you watching on our YouTube channel. I loved Pike in this episode because it was like the grandparent, because of just, and I'm saying grandparent because it's 120 years difference between them. That's like, he loves having the kids there, but by the time the weekend is over, he's ready to give them back to mom and dad.
It's true.
Yeah.
And again, I come back to just all the moments, I wasn't ready for hot Spock, or how she's the one who ends up being kind of responsible for, Mariner's kind of responsible for loosening up Uhura a little bit and getting her there. I love it. Again, this picture's like, you're real. Let's go on here. But the other aspect that they did with this that I love so much was they also made it a love letter to Strange New Worlds, and that this whole time frame of Star Trek, of the original series of Strange New Worlds, with Boimler and Mariners, both in their own way fandom of this era of Star Trek. And of course, we got to mention Boimler, Spock and Boimler's romance that developed apparently between Ethan Peck and Jack Quaid during the filming of this episode. They say in the Ready Room how they were inseparable at times during this. But I mean, this is a great again moment where you have these moments of crossover, but they did it in such a way that it never felt like Strange New Worlds was giving way to how Lower Decks does things, or that Lower Decks was being taken away because they were on Strange New Worlds. It really was a true brilliant meshing of these two shows, which gives all the credit in the world to not only the writers, but of course Jonathan Frakes, who directed this episode. And I remember when in the Ready Room, when he says, they told me I was going to get to direct the comedy episode this year, he was like all in. And I can't even imagine the daily chaos on set. And I mean, it's like controlled chaos, but we know Frakes lets the Star Trek actors have a lot more freedom than maybe some.
If anyone's perfect for directing this episode, it was definitely Frakes. Yeah. So,
but
Kevin,
real quick, one last thing. I just want to say what a heater Jack Quaid is on right now. Lower Decks, being on this, being on The Boys, also now the voice of Superman on My Adventures with Superman on Cartoon Network. he is on a roll right now.
He is. And speaking of him, I thought he was fantastic with his interpretation of Boimler. It's kind of like hyperkinetic and the way he kind of screams and runs. If I was only voicing some really eccentric character, I had to act that character out. That sounds really, really tough. But this episode had some wonderful moments. The one that I liked too was Mariner with Uhura, because she looks at Uhura as one of her heroes, and that was really, really cool. I thought that was a lot of fun. I was very, very happy. And also at the end of the episode, I love the fact that we got animated versions of Strange New Worlds. I just wanted you guys to talk on this briefly, Kyle.
I love this because I love the explanation for it. But at the end of this episode, I've decided I know what I need, whether it's a short trek or something. The other thing I need a Mariner time travel where she meets Guinan and they open their own bar together.
Hayley, what are your thoughts on this animated shot here that we have of the Strange New Worlds cast? Spock with the wiggly arm.
Yeah. I will say I was not expecting that. I'm also glad it was kind of brief and short. And I mean, they did well. They did really well with it of the, oh, why are we in 2D? Like, what is going on? Yeah. Kind of thing. And blaming it on the alcohol, which is apropos. I do want to throw in one other thing in here into this. There was like this serious moment in this comedy episode, which I think was really well done. Boimler is upset. Mariner's not through yet, but Boimler is super upset that he's messing everything up. And he's down and he's listening to the engine. And Pelia comes up to him and she's, just like, oh, I do love this sound. It's so soothing. And, he kind of goes into this and she says to him that, she knew someone who said, I always pretended to be someone I wanted to be until I finally became that someone, or he became me. And there's, in my line of work, we have, smile until you can actually make yourself smile. It's one of our DBT skills. And it's that adage of fake it till you make it. And I really loved that kind of touching moment because I think that was a really good turning point for him for Boimler in this episode to turn around and say, okay, like, if I'm going to be stuck here, I'm going to be stuck here. And I can't continue to pollute the timeline because then things are just not going to happen that need to happen and that should happen. And I thought that was really kind of touching. So then when Mariner comes and he's like, no. And then he's like, stop touching this and don't do this and don't do this. And he's kind of like telling her to stop because in a lot of episodes in Lower Decks, she's like, oh, dude, stop it. She's kind of the one who's doing that. And I like that role reversal between the two of them in this.
That reminds me of the other thing that I thought was really cool in this, and something that we had the layers or eggs or whatever you want to say that have been laid in Lower Decks is the misnomer that all Orions are pirates of some sort. And I love the fact that they're dealing with these scientists that they thought might have been pirates, and that they are able to have a peaceful negotiation with these scientists, and that one of Tendy's relatives is on the ship. And I thought that was a really nice thing that they touched on as well. So, Kyle.
One other moment on the animated side of things, too. Let's not forget the opening sequence and snuck in one of the great little parts of the Lower Deck opening into Strange New Worlds with a couple, but the one I loved was the creature sucking on the nanocell.
Yeah, the nacelle. What was the other one, Hayley, that we missed? The other thing.
The koala.
Oh, yes, the koala. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really well done. Now, the next thing we want to talk about, let's go ahead and head into topic 2 of our first away mission here. All right, guys. So I borrowed this idea from one of the topics in the Ready Room, and they did a cool little bit on the Ready Room about the best Star Trek character crossovers from other shows visiting other shows. And I'm like, you know what? I know there's an article out there that probably rates the best. And I have an article that came out in January of 2022 by Donnie Summerlin. Says these Star Trek crossovers within the beloved franchise prove just how well the format can work under the right circumstances. And the top 10 that they had was Spock's dad's mind melds with Captain Picard in The Next Generation, the Kobayashi Maru simulation in Star Trek Prodigy, Tuvok serves under Captain Sulu in the Star Trek Voyager episode. Scotty is suspended in Transporter Buffer in a Next Generation episode. Riker and Troy save the Cerritos in a Lower Decks episode. Captain Picard's not-so-welcome reception on the first episode of Deep Space Nine. Kirk meets Picard on the big screen in the movie Generation. Worf joins DS9 from The Next Generation. Ambassador Spock goes rogue in the Unification two-part series in TNG. And number one was the DS9 crew meets the Tribbles in DS9. And I don't remember that being mentioned in the little short snippet on the Ready Room. But I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on some of your favorite, if there was something else that we're missing here, of characters crossing over to other Star Trek series. Kyle, what about you? What's your favorite?
Well, there's one I want to throw out that they didn't mention either, but I've always considered crossover. It's the episode when DeForest Kelley was on Next Generation as an unnamed admiral. But come on,
that was Encounter at Farpoint, the first episode.
Yeah,
right?
first episode. We all know that was Admiral McCoy. Come on.
Yeah,
I just want to get that thrown out. I've always personally had a soft spot for the one with Scotty and crossing over on the Next Generation.
Relics, that's what it was called, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Relics. Yeah. And of course, Worf joining DS9, a lot of people credit that for actually being one of the big things that turned DS9 around. It got a lot of Next Gen fans who maybe weren't keen on DS9 watching
Season 4, I think he made it, because that's when they wrote in the war with the Klingons, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
The Dominion, you mean?
Yeah. No, this was the Klingon War before the Dominion.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
And and anytime you have Riker show up on Lower Decks, it's always fun.
Well, remember Riker showed up on DS9, but it's Thomas Riker.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Hayley, what about you? What are some of your favorite Star Trek crossovers?
Yeah, definitely. Relics is one of my favorites. I really enjoy that episode, and it's hard because Geordi's so rude to him at first.
Yeah.
And that's part of why Geordi gets such a bad rap, is people are like, well, he was such a jerk to Scotty. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but he redeems himself at the end. Yes, Trials and Tribulations is always good fun. I think everything else is pretty much just what everybody else has done. I was never a fan of Generations, but that's just me, and I have my reasons. So, and then seeing Spock when you get to first see him join on TNG, that was huge. I remember that was like a big shocker back in the day.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think from TNG, just because they did several, I would probably say the Spock one was definitely there, because we had Sarek as well, which I thought was great. But to me, and I'm happy that it was number one on this list, is definitely Trials and Tribulations, when the DS9 crew goes back in time to stop the shenanigans that they were planning on doing with explosive tribbles, I guess, or something like that. And the clever way, now, even though they didn't actually act with the original crew, it was done so seamlessly and done so well, I was believing it. And I love the behind the scenes where, like, even little things like they had to find those chairs that were made in the 60s for the sets, inserting guys into the famous lineup after the fight, but also the fight choreographer having to reteach the stuntman and the cast crews how to fight like they did in the 60s. Just little things like that I thought was great. So
and at least there were no attack tribbles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are fun, let me tell you.
I thought that was done so well. All right, guys, let's get into some trivia. guys, we got some trivia for those old scientists. The title of the episode is a term that Commander Ransom, USS Cerritos, uses to refer to the 2260s. The abbreviation TOS also stands for the original series, retronym for the first Star Trek series, which took place in 2260s, and has characters which appear in Strange New Worlds like Spock, Uhura, Chapel, Pike, Omega, and Kirk. Commander Ransom, played by Jerry O'Connell, and I thought this was interesting, really cute scene, fawns over Boimler's poster of number one, played by Rebecca Romaine, calling her the hottest number one ever. Jerry O'Connell and Rebecca Romaine are married in real life. Both Romaine and O'Connell's characters are first officers on a starship. I got that. I thought that was really, really cool. Somewhere out there, John Stamos is going, damn it.
Yep.
Mariner refers to a dystopian San Francisco in the middle of a riot in reference to DS9 Past Tense Part 2, which was directed by Jonathan Frakes. When Boimler mounts the saddle in Pike's office, he calls out, Riker! This, of course, is reference to the Commander William Riker, first officer of the Enterprise in Star Trek The Next Generation, had a unique way of sitting down by throwing his leg over the back of the chair. This has become known as the Riker maneuver in fan circles. Boimler served under Captain Riker aboard the USS Titan in the second season of Star Trek Lower Decks. And if I remember in one of the Lower Decks too, guys, I think even Will Wheaton started doing this too. I think he did a couple.
Yeah, I think they talked about that in the Ready Room, in fact.
Yeah.
And as you had asked earlier, Kyle, yes, as a special surprise during San Diego Comic-Con 2023, this episode premiered 5 days early. The remainder of season 2 is moved up a week to compensate for the resulting role in the theater or in the release schedule. Kyle.
As much as I love Paramount for doing this, think of the podcasters. Think of the podcasters.
Does anyone have any comments on the trivia or maybe some of their own?
Nope.
Okay, guys.
Well, a lot of fun.
What do you say we let's go ahead and jump into the Ready Room for this episode? All right, guys. So in this episode, Star Trek Lower Deck stars Jack Quaid and Brad Boimler and Tawny Newsome as Beckett Mariner, as well as episode director Jonathan Frakes talk with Will Wheaton, Star Trek Next Generation, of course, about bringing their animated characters to life in Star Trek Strange New World episode, Those Old Scientists. Plus, go behind the scenes and learn the historic episode was made and revisit other Trek crossovers and much more. We've already talked about the Trek crossovers, guys, but I did want to get your guys' thoughts on the interview itself. It was obviously a joy for all of them to be there in person with Will. I thought that was a lot of fun there. Hayley, what was your thoughts on the interview?
I really enjoyed it. And I love the opening part where they had little snippets from some of the cast from Strange New Worlds talking about this crossover and how they knew it was going to happen and they weren't sure how it was going to happen. And that they actually liked the way it turned out. And I think Melissa Navia said something about how she thought their whole cast was going to be animated and the whole episode was going to be animated. So that was a nice discussion. Celia Rose Gooding, she has a Star Trek Delta necklace, and I love that because this is the second time she's in like a little thing, and so she wears that. And the other thing I really loved was how Jack and Tawny were talking about how welcome they feel into the Star Trek family. Jack specifically called out Will for really being the first person to welcome him, and
that was at a convention, wasn't it? I think
so. Yeah. And that. Tawny mentioned how she kind of gets this feeling that from Will and Jonathan that they really want to share like what Star Trek has done for them and how that's impacted their lives. And I thought that was really wonderful that, the old timers are welcoming these new people into this universe, because I mean, once you're in it for life, even if it's just a couple episodes.
I'm glad you mentioned it too. Kyle, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. And I just want to mention, I like the fact that they took their communicators and especially how they kind of talked about that, because when you're doing a voice, you don't get to take home cool stuff that you're wearing because it's a voice. But your thoughts on the Ready Room interview with this cast and, of course, Jonathan Frakes.
This is one of my all-time favorite episodes of the Ready Room because I think what was so great about this is having these three who are always so loose and off the cuff anyway. And you add in the fact of just Will Wheaton's relationship with Jonathan Frakes. It was just one of the most easygoing episodes of the Ready Room. And they shared so much. And I love the fact of how respectful Jack and Tawny were and knowing their place in history, but also just hearing them geek out about, oh my God, the first day we saw ourselves in uniform, all these first time experiences they had. And I also loved how Jack kind of threw Tawny under the bus a little bit. It's like, yeah, she was constantly breaking things on set. and everything with that. And it felt like they belonged and they were accepted. There was a couple other things, though. I love how Jonathan Frakes talked about working with Mike McMahon and talking about their different directing styles, but yet how they were able to let them each do their thing, but merge it together in a way that works so well. Because it is different when you're going from an animation to a live action project. It's a whole different process to it. And I love how the respect that was shown by Frakes and McMahon in the interviews for them to each other. And then lastly, I love how we found out that Tawny Newsome has a new job as part of Star Trek now, because thanks to her ad-lib work noticed by Alex Kurtzman, she now is one of the writers for the new Star Trek Starfleet Academy show, because Alex recognized that she had to be a writer with all this ad-lib work she was doing and everything like that, and it got her this job writing on Starfleet Academy, which means I need like a Beckett Mariner teaching class for Starfleet Academy or something like that.
That was great today. And I got to tell you guys, after seeing her, I remember Tawny Newsome from the TV series Space Force with Steve Carell. And she was very funny in that. And seeing her in live action and just seeing her on, being interviewed on this show, I gotta tell you, I was kind of crushing on her a little bit. I dig her.
Yeah.
I want to see more of her in live action and see her do more other stuff as well. So yeah,
I did love the fact that she's like, yep, Celia Rose Gooding and me, we're friends for life now.
All right, guys, let's go ahead in our away mission number 2. We got one more episode to cover. Here we go. All right, guys. Next, we are discussing episode 8, Under the Cloak of War. And this one took a serious turn. 180, you could say, so to speak. Let's go ahead.
Two sides of the same coin here.
Yeah. Hayley, could you hit us up with the Admiral's log for the Cloak of War?
Of course. The Enterprise is hosting Ambassador Dakhra, a Klingon general who defected to the Federation and works to promote peace. He is said to have turned against the Klingon Empire after killing his own officers when he learned they had ordered attacks on civilians on the moon of Jagal. Veterans of the Federation Klingon War, including Ortegas, M'Benga, and Chapel, are uncomfortable with his presence. Flashbacks show M'Benga and Chapel's experience serving at a field hospital on Jagal and witnessing the brutality of the Klingon forces under Dakhra's command. Dakhra invites M'Benga to join his campaign for peace, citing the symbolic power of a partnership between two men who are on opposing sides at Jagal, and offers to help M'Benga find healing from the trauma he experienced. M'Benga rejects Dakhra's offer and eventually reveals that he knows it was Dakhra who ordered the attacks on civilians, and M'Benga himself who killed the Klingon officers whose deaths Dakhra took credit for. A fight breaks out, and M'Benga kills Dakhra with the same dagger with which he killed his officers. M'Benga claims to Captain Pike that he killed Dakhra in self-defense, and Chapel corroborates his story. Oh boy.
Oh, guys, this was a heavy one here. Let's go ahead and Kyle, let's get your first reactions to this episode.
Yeah, so I love this episode. This is one of the, and I'm going to say this. This is one of the most powerful episodes of Star Trek, period, that I have ever seen. The last episode of Star Trek that hit me this heavy, and I can't think of the title of it, you have to forgive me, but it was the episode of DS9 where it's Cisco basically being interviewed, or he's talking the entire episode and talking about what he ended up doing and what just that kind of weight that you felt coming out of that episode. I felt this same kind of weight on this episode, but this is something I've been wanting to see for a while, ever since really the season premiere, with everything with Mbenga and Nurse Chapel and a little bit of the history of the Klingon War. And it's two absolutely amazing performances, of course, by Babs. But I have got to shout out Robert Wisdom as Doc Ra in this episode, because you just those two and how they played off of each other and how they carried each other it was mind-blowing in this episode. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't been able to get myself to rewatch this episode, not because I dislike the episode, but because my brain was processing so much with this
episode.
It's
a tough watch.
And
yeah,
it's a tough watch, but it's a must watch as well.
Yeah. What about you, Hayley? What are your first reactions to this episode?
This, I like Kyle said, it was incredibly moving. It's such a powerful episode. But again, it's one of those episodes that's addressing something that we have people on Earth dealing with now. And we have PTSD and we have war, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I highly, highly value, and I know I've said this before, but I really appreciate shows that really show what people, and do a good job of it, of showing what happens when people have PTSD because they've been through something, or people are experiencing struggles, and dressing it head on rather than just sweeping it under the rug and acting like the person is fine when they're really not. And I really appreciate that a lot of television shows are working to do that rather than just acting like it's not there, and that the crews and the cast are doing research. I know that we'll bring it up, but I love that Babs and Jess did research on PTSD so that they could have properly act in a way of someone who's having PTSD flashbacks. And I thought that lended so much power to this episode, and the nuances between those of the crew who had been there and had been fighting and the crew who hadn't been there. And, you know, number one says it at one point that the morale of the entire ship is low, just based off of a few people having this massive reaction to somebody on top of, I mean, everybody else, because we have to remember TOS, we're still not friends with the Klingons really, and we have problems with the Klingons. I think it was so well done, and the flashbacks were appropriate and not too overwhelming, and it incredibly moving.
Well said. Kyle, you got another one you want to say?
One other thing too that this episode, and it's a question that happens a lot in a lot of shows and stuff, that this episode, I think especially, you ask yourself, does the good outweigh the bad? And especially in this episode, that's a really big question.
I think the question is still out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I remember in the first season, the one Mbenga episode was that really weird one. I can't even remember it because it was my least favorite of the episode. And I know it had something to do with his daughter too. And it was
the whole fantasy episode.
Yeah, that was.
I was thinking about you and wondering what you were going to say about this. So I'm excited to hear.
I wanted a really good Mbenga episode because I feel like he was the one that's been overshadowed this whole time. And we got a little bit of tease of him and his experience, including with Chapel in the Klingon War. But oh my God, I did not expect this. And this, I think, is the darkest they've shown any main Star Trek characters past get. Anybody else get that bad?
Not as far as a main character on a show, no.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, and we'll get it more into that in one of the topics of the next away mission. So let's go ahead and hit the next topic here in our away mission, guys. Hold on a second here. Here we go. Guys, I want to talk about our first topic here is the so-called butcher of Jagal. I thought Robert Wisdom as Doc Ra had a very commanding performance, and I kind of saw the episode going in a way we've seen in Star Trek before, where this very feared person is now trying to be peaceful, and they're trying to repair relationships. We saw that a lot with Cardassians and DS9. Robert Wisdom was just great in this. And I did have an article that I'm going to go more into in a moment here, but I wanted to read part of this article here. Doc Ra, now a diplomat advocating for peace and distancing himself from the Klingon Empire, gained notoriety as the Butcher of Jagal. Despite authorizing the killing of Federation civilians, including children, it was the Klingons who bestowed him with this title, not Starfleet. According to legend, Doc Ra slaughtered his own men while retreating from the moon of Jagal, a move that appeared to influence his decision to embrace peace. However, Doc Ra was not truly the Butcher of Jagal. Instead, he abandoned his men, leaving them at the mercy of the actual Butcher, which we'll get to in a second here. Now, you mentioned something, Hayley, I thought was interesting, and one of the things that I really liked about this episode was the balance of the flashbacks, but the flashbacks also not giving away too much at first and kind of just carrying us along until boom, at the end, we see what happens, especially with the knife. But I wanted to get your guys' take on Robert Wisdom as Doc Ra. Hayley, let's start with you.
I think this was a wonderful role. This was a wonderful character, and so interesting because if we look at the timeline in Star Trek history, we're not friends with the Klingons. We are fighting the Klingons. We've had this war with them, but we're very much not allies at all. And it's this interesting idea of it just takes sometimes just one person to come and say, I'm going to change and I want things to be better and I want things to work out and I want to see something change and be different, right? And sometimes it takes more than one person. And I mean, given the history that we have of the Klingon Empire, they're a stubborn lot, y'all. And I think it's going to take more than one person. But I really liked this character, this older Klingon who has been raised a warrior and this aged wisdom and saying, I want to push aside all of this that I know and I want to work towards peace, I think is really wonderful because we've seen that, like in Picard, we saw Worf turn and be like, no, like he's still badass, but he's still going to fight people. But at the same time, he's trying to find peace within himself. And I think part of this was Doc Ra really wanted to find that peace for himself, too. I think it's not just about peace for the Klingon Empire and the Federation together to work towards that. I think it's, how can I do that for myself? How can I help other people find that peace for themselves? Spock goes up to him and asks about the art of war and this Klingon book that's kind of similar and the connections between those two. And after war has to come peace. And whether that's an internal peace or an external peace between the warring factions just depends on the circumstances, right? So I think that it was such a well done character. I was skeptical. I thought something was going to happen. But I think truly at the end, he really does and did want to find some reconciliation between the Klingon Empire and the Federation for this path forward, which I know we know happens because it's talked about in TOS. But I think that, it was also this catalyst for a lot of things that some of our characters need to face because they haven't found that peace for themselves about what happened yet. And so it was nice to kind of bring that into perspective because that's something they need to work on. I think one of my favorite lines of this episode is, we don't need to be friends, just allies. And Doc Ra said that in this episode. And sometimes we don't need to be friends with people. I can be a friend to you, or I can just be someone who agrees with you and works with you in peace to move something forward. But I don't have to be friends with you. I don't have to really, really love you or like you to have some interactions with you. I can just be someone that we are working to collectively move something forward for the greater good, right? So The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, as Spock likes to say.
Well said. Kyle, in this segment here, we're doing a little look on the guest stars here. And, of course, Robert Wisdom shined as Doc Ra here. And I want to get your thoughts on his performance.
His performance was absolutely outstanding. And what was so outstanding about it was there's a charisma he had with this character. And it was a charisma that pulled you in, and how he performed this character, that you wanted to hear this man speak, but you also are thinking in your mind, what don't we know? What aren't we finding out? And the way he portrayed this character and how this character was written and portrayed, I find this is one of those times where you wish you could go talk to a character in the future and like a timeline in the future of this series, because I would love to be able to, like, at one point sit down with Worf and have his thoughts about this character and his place in both human and Klingon history. I think that would be a really fascinating conversation, because this is obviously somebody who was accomplishing great things based off of taking credit for what was basically a falsehood. And so he was living a lie and yet doing these amazing things and brokering these PCs and these treaties. So again, and like he says, if they find out the truth, it wipes away everything I do. So you look at that. You also look at the place on the Klingon side, where if the Klingon, he's probably in his own mind, and maybe it's why he's gone this direction he has, because of how he acted and running away and letting his officers fight the actual butcher, leaving them dishonor. That is huge dishonor on Klingon principle. So there's so many layers here and so much interesting things divulge into with this character. And again, I in ways I'm disappointed that they killed this character off. I understand it for the meaning of this episode and the weight it puts on this episode, but wow, this is a character I would have liked to have seen a little more of, make appearances, and his effect on the crew and other things in a couple of more episodes, or maybe even an episode where maybe they have to go try and rescue him, and that really causes some issue. But either way, this is one of the best guest performances on Star Trek also in a long time. One other thing I do want to say, and Kevin, I think you'll agree with me on this too, and this is just one of the few drawbacks I had in this episode, was when they show the flashbacks and they show the footage from Star Trek Discovery, and really seeing the Klingon makeup from that to this, it so throws you out. And that is just...
It was just a reminder of how wrong decision it was for Discovery to make whatever version of Klingons those were. I'm sorry. That was not the right decision. So, you guys have said this. I don't know if I can top what you guys said. It's not a competition, but you guys did a great job here. Robert Wisdom was very magnetic, the way that he delivered his speeches. I love the moments that he had, of course, with Mbega and doing the martial arts together. And you knew it wasn't going to end well one way or the other. But what I found interesting it's not a large trope, but it is a trope to where someone who's usually horrible, also someone who is a hero, claims to have done something that got him famous, but they didn't really do it. And in most cases, when it's a bad person claiming to have done bad things, it's usually another person who was really, really bad and then kills them or whatever. But you don't expect these bad, horrible things to be one of your main co-stars of your TV show, who you're supposed to hold in high regard. But now you kind of hold back, don't want to piss off this guy. Guys, well, we did have another guest star that is very notable. We had Clint Howard make another appearance of Star Trek. In trivia, I'll have a little bit more on his history in Star Trek. But he played Buck Martinez, one of the officers, I guess, of the medical team there in the past, there in the Klingon War. Very matter-of-fact guy, saying, I don't, didn't have everything that they needed. And one of the things, too, that I thought was fascinating in this episode, guys, was showing the triage of having to deal with all of these people getting hurt. It seemed like every second it was like, you heard the transporter voice saying incoming, incoming, incoming. And then they tried to do the transporter trick they did with Scotty, to try to keep someone alive, and how that didn't work out eventually. But I want to get you guys' thoughts here on Clint Howard. We love seeing Clint Howard. There was no Ron Howard sighting, so that was cool. Usually he's in Ron Howard movies. But Hayley, what are your thoughts on Clint Howard?
No, it was nice to see him again, and kind of this gruff, no nonsense person. And after working in that field hospital, I can only imagine. I've got to be blunt. Hey, you're the head nurse. And she's like, what? I just got here. He's like, well, yeah, I don't have time. Yeah. And then, it's immediately incoming. She doesn't even get to, find her actual tent. And I think, we might get to it, but those flashback scenes, I think, was really, really well done. Those are some things that, the constant fighting in the background, and the noises and the sounds and the shakes and the booms and we tried to hide our signal so that they don't find our hospital, but eventually they're probably going to find us type scenario. And that's real, that isn't what it's not quiet and peaceful and calm. And to be able to work under that kind of pressure, I can only imagine. And I've heard stories in real life of where someone's heart stops beating and they have to use hands to get them going type thing. And so it really was very, very powerful.
Yeah. Kyle, your thoughts on Clint Howard as Buck Martinez?
Well, we can officially stamp this an official era of Trek because Clint Howard has been now part of this era of Trek as well. So that's always fun. What I loved about this too, and Hayley, you brought it up, is when he talks like, tells Chapel, you're the most experienced one here. You're the new head nurse. This is obviously a guy who's been in this situation for a while, and he just rolls with it. And he just does what has to be done, and he rolls with it. And I'm Kevin. You're gonna laugh a little bit at this reference, but I'm watching these flashbacks, and all I keep thinking is, okay, it's Star Trek MASH unit. MASH. Where's Hawkeye Pierce here? I mean. It had
I'm not a fan of MASH, dude.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I figured you'd find the irony of it. But it was so well done. And one of the things that I like too is how in this setting, how we get introduced to Mbenga in this setting. He's just chilling out, having a bath or in a tub or whatever, and then here comes the next round of wounded, and yet everything with this it felt real and it felt like something sometimes we don't always get with Star Trek, where they felt, especially on the medical side, they were challenged, and it wasn't because they had the tech. They didn't have the tech that they are normally used to. They didn't have organ regenerators. They didn't have this. They were having to go in and do the hard medical work, the hands-on medical work. And you can even see it with Chapel. She's almost a little bit overwhelmed by it at first to just make that adjustment. And how they handled that and how they presented it, I thought was so incredibly well done.
One of the things that I liked about Clint Howard's character, Buck Martinez, and as you guys alluded to, we see Chapel and Mbenga in the middle of war at its worst, having to deal with the carnage of the people that are wounded and dying. And I thought that was a very interesting thing, especially seeing the relationship between Chapel and Mbenga get stronger as colleagues and war veterans, and understanding that this new visitor, or this familiar visitor to the Enterprise here, and this trying to move forward with peace negotiations, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I thought that was a really cool seed set. Back to Clint Howard, I just want to say it was really cool to see him, and I always love Clint Howard, especially when he pops up and everything. I remember him in Austin Powers, and of course almost every Ron Howard film. But if you guys want a really touching thing to watch, I think it was back in the 90s. He was given a MTV, I think it was an MTV Awards for a Lifetime Achievement Award for all the stuff that he's done. And yes, it's MTV Movie Awards. It's not the Oscars, but he was so overcome with appreciation and emotion. He accepted that thing like it was an Oscar, and it's just a very touching scene. I YouTube it. It is a really cool thing to see, and it just made me appreciate him even more. And I love it when he pops up. So he's just one of my favorite character actors, and he's not one of that guys. Everyone knows who Clint Howard is. And I love seeing him. I'd love to see him something in regular. I would love him to be in Star Trek in regular, and we'll go over some trivia and some other stuff that he has been in. All right, guys, we got one more topic I wanted to discuss, but before we do, I did want to bring up the scene, Ortega here, and that very uncomfortable dinner scene there. The tension was palpable. You could cut through it, guys. And as much as they tried to show their try to be cool and be a team member, some of them were like, "Yeah, I gotta get out of here." I want to get your thoughts on this very tense dinner scene here. Let's go, Kyle. Let's go with you.
Not only this dinner scene, but even the opening sequence with Ortegas, where she's talking about it, and then they walk in behind her and everything like that. With Ortegas, it's different than with Chapel and with Mbenga, because she didn't see him as maybe as much as what was happening on the ground because of her role within Starfleet, but she knew it, and she knew what she did experience and what she did hear and what she did see. And I think when you look, especially in that dinner scene, where she is so conflicted and she gets to herself to a point where it's like, as much as I have respect and love for Captain Pike, I can't do this. It's too much. And I think she handles the performance, and how she handles it is in a very well done way, in that she's still respectful to Captain Pike, who is trying to be the peacemaker here, but hadn't been through what the Enterprise was stationed with during the Klingon War. He hadn't been through what they had been through, so he didn't necessarily have a full understanding of it. And how he was understanding of Ortegas, but still apologetic to the ambassador, but he never wavered to one side or the other. He kept his cool, both in respecting Ortegas' decision, but honoring the ambassador. I just thought it was so well handled, and I think in a way where probably there would be in other situations where they try to write this off, it would get a lot uglier than what it did.
Hayley, your thoughts on this dinner scene here in Ortegas?
Yeah, Kyle said it. I think the fact that, she tried her best to sit there and participate in this dinner, knowing that, she was trying to put on, as Benga said it, the, Starfleet face, essentially, but at one point couldn't. And I think my favorite thing about that was, she stood up and she said, I'm done, basically. Dakra didn't take offense to that. Pike is saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he's like, "No, it's understandable," that because he knew that this order came down from probably Starfleet as well, that, he was going to have dinner with people who had fought in the Klingon Federation War. And so I thought that was another powerful moment for his character, just in that he didn't take offense to that, because he's a Klingon and they take offense to everything. That he was like, no, it's understandable. I was this awful person and I did horrible things. It's okay that she's upset and wants to leave. Like, that he didn't take offense to that. And then Chapel gets up and she leaves and is like, I'm going to go check on her. And again, he didn't take offense, because he knew, even though he wasn't as awful as he said he was and is claiming that he was still a big part of this war, and a big part of it because, again, he's the one who ordered everyone being killed. Didn't matter if they were a soldier or not, they all needed to die. So he still has these awful aspects, but the fact that he can say, it's okay, I understand that they could not continue to sit here with me, is fine. And I thought that was really powerful.
Well said. Yeah. That reminds me of another uncomfortable dinner scene that we'll bring up in trivia a little bit later. But guys, I want to get into the next topic here in our second. Oh, Kyle. Yes.
Before we get into Dr. Mbenga, can I bring up one other thing involving Nurse Chapel?
Sure, yeah.
I want to say how much I felt in the scene with her and Spock when Spock is trying to be there for her and comfort her and trying to understand. And she's just like, no, there's nothing you can do. I just need space. And I think we've all been there in both ways where we just need space, but we're also the loved one who wants to be there for the person they love. And as much as we say we can understand, as much as we say we want to listen, we want to be there for them, we're in a place where there's nothing we can do. And it's so incredibly frustrating for that. And I thought it was played very brilliantly, both by Jess and Ethan, where you could see Spock's frustrations of and he tries to do the Vulcan thing and walk away with logic, and he turns around and is like, no, I can't. And his human emotion took over. And I identified with that scene so powerfully for a number of reasons, but I just think it was a beautifully acted scene and really true to the situation.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's get into the next topic here. The surprise. All right, guys. This surprised us all. This is the Dr. Mbenga's Dark Secret. He was the real butcher of Jagal. And I got this article off ENHOC Marketing. The article goes, mind-blowing plot twist revealed, unraveling the jaw-dropping ending of Star Trek Strange New World Season 2, Episode 8. In flashbacks of the Federation Klingon War, it is revealed that Mbenga had his own notorious reputation. Starfleet Special Forces dubbed him the Ghost due to his 90 confirmed hand-to-hand kills. Similar to Dakra, Mbenga abandoned his violent past and pursued a career in medicine, choosing to save lives rather than to take them during the War of the Klingons. Sadly, the extreme cruelty witnessed on Jagal forced Mbenga and Dakra to exchange roles. The brutal treatment of children became the tipping point that convinced Mbenga to take on his mission offered by the enigmatic Andorian officer and overthrow the Klingon senior staff on Jagal. Finally, Mbenga embraced the task at hand. Mbenga watched as a Klingon ambassador known as the Butcher of Jagal publicly embrace a message of peace after Mbenga secretly killed Dakra's 3 captains. Although this success served as a foundation for the reformed Klingon warrior to spread his peaceful ideas, Mbenga, a Starfleet officer committed to peace, could never publicly share the truth behind the story. However, when Dakra arrived on the Enterprise, it forced Mbenga to confront the shame and trauma he had suppressed from his involvement in the Klingon War. To move forward, Mbenga believed he had to fulfill his mission and eliminate Dakra, erasing the final reminder of his dark secret. Guys, we got to see some interesting scenes of him getting brutal with that Klingon knife here. I wanted to get your thoughts on this reveal and this side of Mbenga. Hayley, let's start with you.
So in the flashbacks, this Andorian comes, I think his name was Trask, I think was the last name, comes up and he knows that Mbenga has the serum, right? That we saw a few episodes back where makes the soldiers super strong, super powerful, able to do a lot, overpower Klingons essentially in hand-to-hand combat, which nobody can do. And he refuses. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. It's harmful for your bodies to continue to have that in your system. No, we're not going to do that. No. And it is interesting to see this side of him and see this flip. And I was not expecting him to go there. I half thought it when he asked Dakra which of his officers fought the hardest. And, he says Kif fought the hardest. And, at this end scene where, he says, no, it wasn't Kif. I can't remember the name now. Another one fought the hardest. You ran, you took off. And it's interesting because I want to go back to this title, The Butcher of Jagal. really, essentially, Dakhra is still the Butcher of Jagal. He is the one who handed down this order for everyone to be killed. Women, children, civilians, everyone had to die. But it's interesting that we're giving this title to someone who killed just 3 Klingon officers, rather than saying the Butcher of Jagal is the person who carried out these orders to kill everyone instead. The Butcher is the one who killed the officers who are carrying out this order and having their soldiers carry out this order. It's quite an interesting play on words for me to think about, because really, I wouldn't say that Mbenga was the Butcher of Jagal. He stopped things. He prevented further problems from happening, because he killed the officers, Dakhra ran off and he took off. Officers are going to stop eventually, because they're going to say, well, no one's giving us further orders. What are we supposed to do? So, but I definitely was not expecting this twist. And I wasn't expecting, despite their relationship, for Chapel to lie to Pike and Lon. And then for Mbenga to really still not face it. Like, he's put it out of his mind, and it's almost this aspect of himself that did that. Like, he didn't do it, but a part of him did, and he doesn't want to acknowledge that part of himself that did this atrocity and did this horrible thing. So he doesn't want to face it to himself. And so at the end of the episode, when Pike comes and he talks to him, he can't even face it to Pike, even though Pike knows, I'm sure, that there's more to the story than he's being told, because he says, hey, whatever it is, I will go to bat for you. But Mbenga has to be able to face it for himself first. And I think he's tucked that part in a box, and he's buried it so deep, and he doesn't want to bring it forward and acknowledge that that's something that he was capable of doing.
Kyle, your thoughts?
So a couple of things here based off of what Hayley said, and of course, my own thoughts too. Obviously, there is still so much more to Mbenga we don't know. Let's talk about the fact he had 90 hand-to-hand kills before the Klingon War even happened. What was he doing? Was he working for an early version of Section 31? What was going on there? What made him develop Protocol 12? What was? Because he's the
Does
one.
making him a doctor make him a more thorough killer?
Well, there's that, and I think that's like an interesting dichotomy with Mbenga, is
because these are hand-to-hand kills. That's what I'm saying. You know, he knows where the arteries are. He knows.
Yeah.
You know,
but he's choosing to take his skills and knowledge, obviously, of the human body, maybe in his own mind, to make up for things he's done in the past as a healer now instead of a killer. But in what reference to Hayley said about being the Butcher of Jagal, let's remember the Klingons gave that name and gave that title. It wasn't us. So the Klingons are basing it over the fact they think he killed those 3 officers. And that's such a thing that makes him the Butcher of Jagal. For him to say wipe out the life on the planet, that's more of Starfleet thinking. That makes you the Butcher. That's not Klingon thinking. So I think you have that. So you've got that interesting thing going on, because I think there is a difference in how, and you see it even in the episode, how maybe some members of Starfleet define his title as Butcher of Jagal. As far as Mbenga goes, and his role here, I don't necessarily know that he's not accepting of it. And what you're saying, I think what it is it's his burden to bear, and it shouldn't be anybody else's burden to bear. And I think it's in his own way, he's punishing himself for it. And he might realize what he's done, but it's for him and him alone, him and Chapel, who just happened to be a part of it. I mean, he can't hide it from Chapel, but it even seems like there's an unspoken understanding that we don't speak about this unless we absolutely have to. But it's just, she understands. He just wants to leave it alone. It's his weight to bear. When he's ready, he'll deal with it. He might open up about it. And I think, but it also shows just how much they bonded through this experience that she covers for him. And it really does, again, just show the importance of their relationship and friendship, which is obviously much more than friends. They are part of a brotherhood that contains 2 people. And it makes it that much more of a powerful tie And I wonder if this is something that might be even play out later on between in Chapel and Spock's relationship. Is what is she keeping from Spock when it comes to Mbenga? But it was such a powerful performance. And again, it comes back to, you did something wrong, but was it for the right reasons? He took the Protocol 12. He went after these Klingon generals because he was in anger over what was happening there, but he also wanted to save the people who were getting butchered. And then he gets confronted with this person again later in life, and you see it in that fight sequence between the two of them, the training sequence. And you just get the feeling the whole time that's when I start realizing there's more to this. There's more that we're not knowing. And you almost in ways feel like Mbenga was holding back his own emotions because he knew if he let them go, he might at that point kill the ambassador, which ends up his emotions get the better of him later in the episode, and he does kill the ambassador.
So obviously the ambassador has his own atrocities that he is accountable for, even though the Klingon commanders that he supposedly killed, that we find out that it was Mbenga do it, he still is a reason why the crew who served in the Klingon War despise this guy. And what I find fascinating in this too was that when you see them finally come to the fight and Mbenga ends up killing him, Nurse Chapel covers up right away for him. And I have just an excerpt from the article, that same article I wanted to read regarding this. The central theme of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 8, Under the Cloak of War, revolves around the profound transformation experienced by veterans of Star Trek Discovery's Klingon War. It becomes evident that those who were not part of the conflict cannot fully comprehend the extent of these changes. This is exemplified through shocking revelations concerning Dr. Mbenga and involvement of Nurse Chapel in a cover-up as Under the Cloak of War draws to a close. Doc's visit reveals the deep interpersonal division stemming from Enterprise's decision to remain on the sidelines during the war. And I thought this was really interesting, guys, that what we got to see in these flashbacks and in the previous episode, that these two really became warriors together and, realized the big picture here, that the ambassador was still a horrible person. And this was when it was coming down to, you can see that Mbenga was like, this guy's got to die, and he needs to be accountable for what he did do, even though maybe the nickname came in direct response to him supposedly killing his own men. He's still responsible for atrocities. But I wanted to get you guys' quick takes on the relationship here and how Nurse Chapel was quickly there to cover up what really happened with the death of the ambassador. Hayley.
Well, it's very much that brothers in arms type relationship that soldiers form with each other. There's a deep, deep bond formed during war through these shared experiences, through not just fighting and being in war and being in battle together, but then coming back, and really those are the people that really can only understand and truly understand what you've experienced, what you've seen. And that creates such a deep, deep connection. And these bonds that are formed with soldiers is really incredible. And it's wonderful because, much, Kyle mentioned about Spock, wanting to connect with Chapel on that and understand. Sometimes it's harder to come up with the words to explain it to someone who hasn't experienced something than it is to talk to them about anything else. And so it's easier for these people who've experienced situations like this to turn to each other and talk about that. And so on one hand, it's not surprising that Chapel would lie to Pike and La'an about what had happened and to help cover it up. But on the other hand, she's also a Starfleet officer. And so that dichotomy, I wonder how long can that last in herself, because she knows that she lied, but there's also this, we are in arms together and we went through this thing together. And only you can truly understand what that felt like, because she could go talk to Ortegas, but Ortegas wasn't at this field hospital. So really she would have no one to talk to about her experiences, to process them and process the trauma that comes with it. And so on one hand, it's understandable, but then on the Starfleet side and being a Starfleet officer, it's really quite interesting. And so I'm curious to know how that plays out. For her and for Mbenga. As we know, he continues being, but he's not the head doctor on the Enterprise when Kirk becomes captain. So it's quite interesting, but it's understandable.
Kyle, Nurse Chapel straight up lied to the captain about what happened, covered up.
So here's the thing with all of this. And Hayley brought up brothers in arms. But here's the other question, Kevin. You and I have both seen a ton of war movies, and you're being history buffs about war. There was always a question of, during a time of war, do the same rules apply as it does in peace? And I think that is here. There's also something they did in this episode that I think if they hadn't have done it, I would wonder if the outrage would be more. Was when Mbenga is making his decision to go after everybody in this episode, and they see right before he makes the decision to go after them, a child who had been killed in the battle being brought over a transporter, and then when he goes into the morgue and he sees the body of that child covered up, and between that and then the young officer that he had helped save his life earlier being killed again, pushes him over the edge to this. It's in a way where they're trying to give almost a little bit of a justification of why Mbenga made his decision, and it's a general human reaction. And Mbenga knows he has the skills to maybe bring this to an end. He has the ability, but he's got to tap into something of himself that he's trying to leave behind, that he's trying to move past from. So Chapel, knowing this, even though she's only been with him, that's the one thing with this too. We don't get too much of a time frame of how much time she spent with Mbenga, but obviously, too, is that this is just something that even when they reference it in the season opener now, which I think that carries a lot more weight, obviously, after getting this episode, is just that, again, I come back to, they may not speak about it, but they understand it. And I think what's interesting here with Chapel lying, if you watch Pike knows. Now, he might not know the details, but he knows what's going on between these two. And he knows that he's not getting the full story. But I will say this, and this is what makes Pike such a good captain, is Pike doesn't press the issue. At least not yet. And you can't tell me if it was Picard wouldn't be pressing the issue. Picard would want to know the truth. And I think that, but again, this comes back to the character of Pike. And this is too, and I think that's a big, important part of this, because I think even if Pike had known the full truth, he would have still had their backs. But it's a complicated situation, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And I think it was actually handled in a way and written in a way that's probably very accurate to how something like this, especially in a military organizational type situation, would have been handled. And it's very interesting. And I don't think we're done with this topic yet.
Yeah. All right, guys. Next, we have got some Star Trek trivia for you. A couple for this one. We got this is the 5th time Clint Howard has played the role in a Star Trek series. The Corbomite maneuver in '66, where he was 11 years old or 7 years old, something like that, I think.
Yeah, he was pretty young. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Past Tense Part 2, 1995, and Acquisition in 2002, and Will You Take My Hand in 2018, of course, in this episode as well. And as I was referring to earlier, guys, this uncomfortable dinner scene with the Klingon diplomat is very similar to the Star Trek 6 movie, in which the Enterprise crew have a diplomatic dinner with Klingons after Kirk privately admits to hating them because Klingon murdered his son. Did any of you guys get that feeling when you were watching this episode of that movie?
No, sorry.
No. Now that you reference though, and I think about it, Pike probably should have had some Romulan ale on the ready.
I know. I was totally remembering that. I was going like, wow. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get into the Ready Room here discussion. We had a, a very cool interview here with what was I saying? Babs Os. I don't know how to say his last name. Oslu Samanakun.
Wasan Mokun.
Joseph Mbenga
yeah.
and Melissa Navi, Erica Ortegas, open up to Will Wheaton about the hope that comes out of heaviness in Star Trek Strange New World Season 2, Episode 8, Under the Cloak of War. Plus, explore the experiences Starfleet's finest had during the Klingon War, go behind the scenes on this season's epic stunts, and get a preview of next week's episode. Guys, first of all, he interviews Babs here, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that interview. Hayley, let's start with you.
Well, I will say this. Both of these interviews were incredibly powerful this week, and I can't imagine...
Feel free to touch on both of them.
Yeah. Coming out of this episode, how difficult it would be to kind of, these heavy episodes, I can only imagine, because yes, you're an actor and you're portraying these characters and it's just lines and stuff, but it still has to have an impact on you in some fashion. And I really loved Babs's interview and his discussion on, again, I touched on it earlier, but about really kind of looking at documentaries, being able to understand, PTSD, but, he brought up conflict and how Earth has always had conflict. And we've always had this problem where we've had wars being fought. And I mean, I'm 40 and I can't remember a time where there hasn't been one, and which is really sad. I would love for there not to be one at some point in my life. But I thought both of these were really wonderful, really powerful. Melissa talked about, she was filming season 1. Her partner was there with her for 6 months and had passed away. And, her difficulties in filming with this episode, because she'd be fine one minute and crying the next. And I think in that capacity, it only lends more to performances when they're powerful and really difficult, like this episode, because your feelings are very raw when you're dealing with PTSD and having to face something that's a trigger. And she had a lot of raw emotions and raw feelings at the time they were filming this episode. And so I can only imagine the difficulty it was to go through. But, she talks about how the director was like, hey, are you okay? Do you need a minute? Like checking in on her and making sure that she was okay to film before going forward. But it also, I think, lended to her performance of the emotions that Ortegas was feeling about the situation of having Dakra on board. So both of these were really, really wonderful interviews.
Kyle, your thoughts on the interview with Babs and Melissa?
If you watch this episode of The Ready Room and didn't have an emotional reaction to this episode, Kevin, as you like to say a lot of times, you have no heart. This was so powerful. And Babs obviously just hitting home on so many powerful things that are going on in our own world, and how this episode reflected on that. And just, you could hear his passion in his voice about that. And he comes across as one of these type of people that he doesn't need to announce his presence. He doesn't need to get the spotlight. But when you're in the room with him, when you're talking to him, he just has this instant respect feel that he carries and how he carries himself, and it's just very impressive. And it does reflect in his performances in Benga too. But the one for me was the interview with I actually mentioned in last week's Federation to her partner by naming the nebula that they were in was named after him. And seeing her interview with this, I did a little research. Her partner died of
Kyle, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your audio is bugging out real quick here. Just double check it for me. I'm going to come back in a second here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Wait, you sound better right now. Go ahead, continue.
But what I was going to say is that I did a little research on this. Melissa's partner passed away of leukemia in 2021, which means she was filming season 2, probably not that much longer after he had passed. And I am sure that was an incredibly emotional. There's no way you can match that emotional time. But then to have a heavy part in an episode like this, when you're dealing with that, I have nothing but in the world but absolute respect for her that she was able to even do that, because I can't even imagine what was going on within her heart, within her head, with her own emotions. And even now, just to hear her talk and the strength she has, and yet you're watching this interview, and you almost wish she was on set so Will could hug her, because and you wanted to go up and hug her. And I'm at if I could and met her at a con, I would want to go up and hug her, because this is a phenomenal human being to take tragedy like this and use it to be a source of strength so soon after it happened, and to move along and carry her loved one's spirit with her as she's doing this thing that he spent the whole first season with her, and that was some of her final times with him. And it's just it's heartwarming, heartbreaking, and just powerful, and easily the most emotional episode of the Ready Room ever.
I would agree with you guys. Definitely emotional. Babs, real quick. I like that we got to learn a little bit more about him, and that he got to utilize his, I think it was Brazilian martial arts.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, which I thought was really, really cool. And he got to utilize that because that's one that he actually knows. And seeing Melissa's interview, I was kind of starting to almost break up, because I know what it's like to lose a partner, and seeing how she was able to keep it together, but you can tell that she was going to break. And I can only imagine what she was going through in this whole process. And I like the fact that we got to see that. And Kyle, you're right. I would have absolutely loved to have given her a hug and say, I know how that feels. And so this was a very, very interesting Ready Room, and I thought it was done really well. Will was great. It was great to see these two really kind of dive into this episode and have to deal with these characters' trauma that they all shared in different ways. So, guys, thank you very much for discussing the Ready Room here. Let's go ahead and let's wrap things up here. All right, guys, we've just discussed Star Trek Strange New World Season 2 episodes, Those Old Scientists, and we just finished up with Under the Cloak of War. I wanted to give you guys a quick moment to just give any final thoughts you have on both of these, or maybe just one of them. Hayley, let's start with you.
I will just discuss, I think both of these are very powerful in their own ways. One can bring you complete happiness, and the other one, I think, really makes you reflect and makes you think and take a look at maybe those around you who, who've been through some things. And when you notice that they're being triggered, maybe they don't need to talk, but maybe you can pull them out from where they're at, because that can help them more than you think.
Yeah, definitely. Kyle, your any final thoughts on these last two episodes?
These two episodes, to me, I said it earlier, two sides of the same coin. And this shows why Strange New Worlds is not only, in my opinion, by far the best Star Trek show on television right now, it's one of the best shows on television, period. To go from an episode like Those Old Scientists, having so much fun, so much energy, so much just joy out of it, to going to Under the Cloak of War with such a heavy emotional episode and heavy topics and strong emotions in it. And yet both episodes were absolutely outstanding and superb. It's a kudos to everybody who works on Strange New Worlds, from the writers to the actors to the behind the scenes people to the directors. This show is something incredibly special, because very few shows can pull off what Strange New World just did in basically less than a week's time with two episodes, so contrasting but so outstanding.
Well said. And also another example of how well this show is handling a episodic return again, yet still showing and teasing threads of these character developments and bringing them to light as we go, but we still kind of handle other main topics during the show. And being able to go from a very fun episode of animated characters becoming real life live action to finding out that one of your main character cast members is a very proficient killer is definitely two sides of the coin. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get into, let's look into that Orb of Prophecy and get into some subspace signals. All right, guys, this is the Fandom Podcast Network. Next episode of Strange New Worlds is episode 9, Subspace Rhapsody. Wondering if we're going to have some singing involved. We'll find out. Also, Lower Decks will be released later this summer, and Discovery its final season next year. And sometime this Starfleet Academy series. And of course, we had the announcement of the Star Trek Section 31 film. More information later. Anyway, you have been watching us here on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe if you're listening to us. Thank you very much. You can find us on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. We also have the Union Federation Star Trek and Orville podcast feed. Make sure you check that out. That is a great group for talking. I'm sorry, getting two things mixed up here. fpnet.podbean.com is the Union Federation main feed, but also please join us in our Facebook group for Union Federation, where we talk about Star Trek and the Orville and share stories and lots of fun stuff there as well. Please, you can find us on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Also, the Union Federation is on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you check that out. My name is Kevin Reitzel. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. Kyle, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at AKyleW or on Instagram at AKyleFandom or on Threads at AKyleFandom. I do want to throw out, too, if you need to get yourself a little bit ready for this week's upcoming musical episode, Christina Chong has released an album that has just come out, and the first 3 singles are available.
You mean our very serious security officer?
Yes, but she has an album out, and if you want to prep yourself a little bit, check out the singles that have been released from that album, which I think you can find on Spotify and iTunes and all the music streamers out there.
Awesome. You can find me on Threads as well. I forgot to mention Spartan_Phoenix. Hayley, where can we find you?
You can find me lurking around our Facebook group. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Trekkie01D.
Awesome. And Amy, she is on a trek right now over in the UK, having some trek fun with friends. You can find her at Miss Amy Nelson. And also make sure you please check out the BQN, their Facebook group and their podcast feed. It also drops on our own Fandom Podcast Network feed as well. So anyway, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate all your support. Kyle, thank you so much. And Hayley,
it's a pleasure as always, and a great job in the captain's chair, my friend.
Thank you.
Pants or not.
And I've got a new sign out here, guys. Until next time on Union Federation Podcast, live long and prosper. And we are, without a doubt, the weirdest ship in the fleet. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.